And Jeff is a leading liberal activist here in Southern California and a member of the Occupy movement, a loudmouth member of the Occupy movement, I might add. All right, seated next to Jeff is Ernie White. Ernie is with Citizens Against Agenda 21. Ernie, take 10 seconds and explain to our viewers who may not be familiar with Agenda 21.
Agenda 21 is the United Nations take over basically everything that you do in the United States. Agenda 21 is what most people would know as sustainability or smart growth. But again, all it is taking away the rights of the citizens of the United States.
Globalization of laws overtaking U.S. local laws?
Exactly. It would actually be globalization, new laws being put on top of Americans, not even knowing that they're being put on them by your local city councils, by your cities and states, and even your federal government.
All right, it's an important topic. And rejoining us from earlier from Washington, D.C. is Dan Joseph. Dan is our man on the street videographer. He's with the Media Research Center. Hey, Dan, good to have you back.
Good to be back.
All right, with that delay, I thought we had an audio problem. I was like, oh boy, we've got a problem there. All right, so let's talk about Starbucks. They're in the news. Just like Chick-fil-A was in the news a year ago, and it was over a political issue, the CEO of Starbucks is telling legal gun-toting owners that their guns are not welcome in Starbucks stores, Starbucks coffee shops. So, as you may not be aware, in a lot of Starbucks coffee shops, gun owners are showing up in a full force, enjoying their latte and triple venti or whatever it may be. And the CEO has come out and said, no, even though it's legal, it poses a security risk. However, this is a wise move, my employees will not be tasked with enforcing the corporate rule. What do you think here, Jeff Olson? Is this something, is the CEO more concerned, in your opinion, about making a political statement, or is he more concerned about the safety of his customers and employees?
Well, for his shareholders' sake, I hope that his primary concern is selling coffee. But since he's been drug into this, obviously safety is going to be a huge issue. I wouldn't want to be the barista that has to ask the guy to step out with his open carry. I read that Starbucks used to have a law of the land policy, where if you were in D.C. or Chicago, please don't bring your gun. If you're in Montana or Nebraska, go ahead. It's interesting that the enthusiasm of gun owners is what prompted him to change a decision, and it's got to be based on the bottom line. I mean, having a Starbucks full of folks with open carry was not good for business. It was not selling coffee. That's his job, is to move beans.
And Ernie, this CEO has been a political activist in the past, just like Chick-fil-A, just like the left boycotted Chick-fil-A last year, and the right flooded Chick-fil-A to support it. It appears the right, gun-owning right, may now boycott Starbucks. Is this the Chick-fil-A-ization of Starbucks?
Well, Starbucks coffee is good. And I like Starbucks coffee, but if they're going to start withholding the rights of the American citizens, it may be time to start drinking another type of coffee. One thing I liked about Starbucks is when you did see an open carry, a gun owner walk into a Starbucks, and you felt like, guess what? You're safe. You're not going to have to worry about somebody coming in that's going to do something crazy, because the American people were there, and they were using their American citizenship.
It is an interesting point. Before we go to Dan Joseph, I want to come back to Jeff. Now that the Starbucks CEO has announced to the world, your guns are legally unwelcome in my coffee shops, might that be the most vulnerable place in America for people to go out and enjoy coffee?
Well, I hope that the local law enforcement agencies will be able to keep Starbucks customers safe.
Well, let me say, we'll go to Dan Jones. Let me say this. I think, with all due respect, Jeff, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's wishful thinking. There was just a sheriff in Pennsylvania this week, a police officer, who said that the police officer's job, don't expect them to prevent the crime, expect them to clean up the mess afterwards. Let's go to Dan Joseph. Is this the Chick-fil-A-ization of Starbucks?
Yeah, but it's going to be in reverse. I mean, first of all, I would love to own a coffee bean and tea leaf right now, because that place is going to be mobbed with people who just don't want to go to Starbucks, as good as their product is. But this is just so stupid. I mean, Starbucks is now, like you said, a gun-free zone. And the CEO of Starbucks just told the entire world that it's a gun-free zone. And the guy who is going to go in there, the crazy guy, and shoot up the Starbucks, he's not going to care if it's a gun-free zone or not. But yes, both politically speaking, you alienated half the conservative gun owners, like coffee too, last time I checked. You're alienating them. You're hurting your bottom line. And, I've just never heard of somebody shooting people because they were too caffeinated. I've never heard of that happening. Has there ever been a shooting that happened at a Starbucks in the first place? What is this trying to prevent?
Now, this CEO Howard,
I don't understand it at all.
This CEO Howard Schultz has a history of making political statements and getting involved politically. Do you think this was more of a political statement or more of a public safety concern statement?
Well, like I said, it had to be political. If it was public safety, he'd have to point to the fact that, well, this happens in coffee shops sometimes, or, oh, this is something that could, that there's a chance might happen at Starbucks. I just don't see it. I mean, we haven't had that experience in that kind of setting.
Earlier I mentioned about a police officer who's actually a police chief in North Philadelphia, a suburb, I believe it is, called Gilberton. Let's take a look at this video and we'll comment on it.
Yourself again!
Gilberton Police Chief Mark Kessler says he does not regret posting the profanity-laced gun rights videos on the web, even though he expects they'll cost him his job.
All right, so police chief goes out, posts a video advocating for gun rights, the Second Amendment. He's lost his job. He's the one who said, by the way, people should be armed legally, because if you're not, don't wait on the police. They will not prevent a crime. They're there to clean up the mess. He's lost his job. Should he have lost his job, Jeff Olson, for doing something on his personal time that was advocating for the Second Amendment?
The chief has every right to express his opinion and to post any video he wants, but the city council also has a right to pick a new chief.
Right. So should they have jumped in here and fired him?
I can see why they wouldn't want a gun rights activist to be, because the police need to take a neutral stance. The police need to, I appreciate the police taking a neutral position. I understand the policemen's union makes endorsements, but I like the idea that the cops are, and just like in the old days when soldiers wouldn't register to vote, I like the idea that maybe they are above the political process on some level.
All right, so no voting for police officers or advocating for guns. We'll get the response of Ernie White and Dan Joseph on the other side of this break. We're in our grassroots and panel. We're back right after this.
If there are any historians about 50 or 100 years from now, and there should be preserved the kinescopes for 1 week of all 3 networks, they will there find recorded in black and white, or perhaps in color, evidence of decadence, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even it can inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful.
Built an entire economy on an economic lie.
This was the moment when the banks took over the system. It was a financial coup d'etat.
About a destruction of essentially half of the financial wealth in the world.
But the real tragedy is that all this didn't have to happen. Make no mistake about it, this was the biggest scam in financial history.
2 to 3 $1 billion deals per day.
The bankers who pay themselves enormously, the regulators who turned a blind eye.
But you get to keep $480 million. Is this fair?
Your money is being used to bail these guys out. They're never going to be brought to justice. Now how does that make you feel?
Addicted to Money, the hard-hitting documentary series that blows the lid off the global financial meltdown on One American News.
Our entire